The fluorescent lights in conference room 7B hummed their usual monotonous song, casting that particular shade of corporate pallor that made everyone look slightly ill. I had spent 16 years under lights like these, watching them flicker during late-night debugging sessions, squinting at them through the haze of my fifth cup of coffee, while some critical system threatened to collapse. You develop a relationship with fluorescent lights when you work in tech long enough. They become witnesses to your small victories and quiet defeats. My name is Ryan Chen, and I was 51 years old when everything changed. Not 48, not some prime number that sounds better in a story. 51, with the aches and gray hairs and reading glasses to prove it. I mention this because age matters in this story, though perhaps not in the way you might expect. I sat on one side of the conference table, alone. On the other side sat three people: Miranda Okonkwo, our CEO, David Hernandez, head of HR, and a woman I didn't recognize, who turned out to be an outside consultant specializing in organizational restructuring. The presence of that third person told me everything I needed to know before anyone spoke a word. Miranda was not a villain. I want to be clear about that from the start, because the easy version of this story would paint her as one. She was 43, Nigerian-American, the daughter of immigrants who had built this company from nothing into something that employed over 1,000 people. She had an MBA from Stanford and a genuine passion for technology that occasionally surfaced beneath the layers of corporate responsibility. I had watched her navigate the impossible pressures of leading a tech company for 7 years, and while we had never been close, I respected her. "Ryan," she began, and I could hear the discomfort in her voice. "Thank you for meeting with us." "Of course." I kept my voice neutral. 16 years teaches you many things, including how to maintain composure when you can feel the ground shifting beneath your feet. David cleared his throat. He was younger than Miranda, maybe 35, the kind of HR professional who had memorized all the right phrases and genuinely believed that they made difficult conversations easier. "We want to start by acknowledging your incredible contributions to Nexus Technologies over the years. Your work on the cloud infrastructure migration was instrumental in—" "David," Miranda held up her hand. "Ryan deserves directness, not a preamble." She turned to face me fully. "We're eliminating your position. The board has mandated a 15% reduction in senior engineering staff, and after extensive review, your role has been identified as one that can be consolidated with other functions." There it was. Clean, professional, devastating. "I see," I said. "May I ask what criteria were used to make this determination?" The consultant spoke for the first time. Her name was Sarah something. I never did catch it properly. "The evaluation process considered multiple factors including salary band, role redundancy, and alignment with our forward-looking technical strategy." Forward-looking technical strategy. I had heard that phrase before, usually in meetings where people who couldn't write a line of code made decisions about people who could. "Ryan." Miranda leaned forward, and for a moment I saw something genuine in her expression. Not quite guilt, but something adjacent to it. "This isn't about your capabilities. The threat detection system you designed is still the backbone of our security infrastructure, but the board is looking at cost structures, and senior engineers represent expensive legacy knowledge." I finished for her. "Yes, I'm familiar with the concept." An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. David shuffled some papers. The consultant made a note on her tablet. "You'll receive a comprehensive severance package," David said. 18 months of salary, full benefits, continuation for a year, outplacement services. Given your tenure, we wanted to ensure—" "That's generous," I interrupted. It was, actually. More generous than I had expected. "When is my last day?" "We'd like you to stay through the end of the quarter to help with knowledge transfer. 3 months, full salary and benefits during that time, of course." I nodded slowly, processing. 3 months to hand over 16 years of institutional knowledge. 3 months to document systems I had built from scratch, explain decisions I had made thousands of times, prepare whoever came next for problems they didn't even know existed yet. "I'll need to think about the timeline," I said. "Knowledge transfer of this scope typically requires more than 3 months." Miranda shook her head. "I understand, but we have constraints. The board wants to show quarterly results." "The board wants to show quarterly results," I repeated, "and that's more important than ensuring the systems that protect your client's data continue to function properly." "Ryan." "No, I'm asking genuinely." I kept my voice calm, curious rather than confrontational. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to understand the calculation, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like short-term financial metrics are being prioritized over long-term operational stability. and I've seen that movie before. It rarely ends well. The consultant made another note. David looked at Miranda. Miranda held my gaze. The decision has been made, she said finally. I'm sorry, Ryan. I truly am, but this is the reality we're operating in. I stood up. I appreciate you telling me directly. I'll have my response on the timeline by end of week. I walked out of conference room 7B with my dignity intact, which felt like a small victory. The larger defeat would take time to fully absorb. The drive home took 47 minutes, which gave me exactly 47 minutes to cycle through the stages of grief before I had to face my family. I made it through denial and anger somewhere around the 101 interchange, bargained with invisible forces on the surface streets of Palo Alto, experienced a brief depression at the red light on University Avenue, and arrived at something resembling acceptance as I pulled into my driveway. My wife's car was there, which meant she was home early from her shift at the hospital. May was a nurse practitioner, had been for 23 years. She worked in oncology, which meant she spent her days helping people navigate the worst moments of their lives. She had a gift for it, the ability to be present with suffering without being consumed by it. I had always envied that particular skill. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, chopping vegetables with the efficient precision that characterized everything she did. She looked up when she heard the door, and I saw her expression shift almost imperceptibly as she read my face. How bad? She asked. Bad. I set my laptop bag on the counter. Position eliminated. Last day in 3 months. May set down the knife and turned to face me fully. She didn't rush to offer comfort or platitudes, which was one of the things I loved about her. She let the information settle. What did they offer? 18 months severance. Benefits for a year. That's better than most. She returned to her chopping, her rhythm unchanged. How do you feel? It was such a simple question, and yet I struggled to answer it. How did I feel? Angry, certainly. 16 years of building something, of solving problems no one else could solve, of being the person they called at 3 a.m. when the system started failing, and it all reduced to a line item on a spreadsheet. But underneath the anger was something else, something that felt almost like relief. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me saw this coming. The writing has been on the wall for a while, but I think I convinced myself that my work would speak for itself. That if I just kept doing good work, kept solving problems, kept being indispensable, they would have to recognize the value. May nodded. She had heard versions of this before, during late-night conversations when I came home frustrated from meetings where my input was dismissed, or when I watched younger engineers get promoted over me despite having a fraction of the experience. And now? Now I have 3 months to figure out what comes next, and to decide whether I want to fight this or accept it. Is there something to fight? I hesitated. That was the question, wasn't it? The decision had been made through proper channels, following whatever criteria the board and HR had established. It wasn't illegal to prioritize cost savings over experience. It wasn't even unusual. But there was something that had been nagging at me for years, something I had pushed aside because acknowledging it felt disloyal. The threat detection system Miranda had mentioned, the one she called the backbone of Nexus's security infrastructure. I had designed that system. Not at work, not during company hours, not using company resources. I had built it on my own time, in my garage, because the challenge fascinated me, and I wanted to see if my ideas would work. I had shared it with Nexus because I believed in the company, believed in the mission, believed that my contributions would be recognized and valued. I had never signed anything specifically transferring the intellectual property. It had simply been absorbed into the company's portfolio, attributed to the engineering team as a whole, while I continued working in my cubicle for a salary that hadn't kept pace with inflation. Maybe, I said finally, I need to think about it. May finished chopping the vegetables and scraped them into a bowl. Think carefully, she said. Some fights cost more than they're worth. Others cost more to walk away from. Our daughter Emily called that evening, somehow sensing through whatever mysterious parental frequency that something was wrong. She was 24, living in Seattle, working as a software engineer at a startup that made educational games for children with learning disabilities. The irony of her career path was not lost on me. My daughter had followed me into technology, but had found a way to make it meaningful in ways I never had. Dad, what's going on? I told her, keeping my voice matter-of-fact. There was no point in dramatic delivery. Emily would see through it immediately. Those bastards, she said when I finished. After everything you've done for them. It's business, Em. It's not personal. Bullshit, it's not personal. You built their entire security architecture. Remember when I was 14 and you spent 3 weeks basically living at the office because their systems got hit by that ransomware attack? You saved them millions of dollars, tens of millions probably. That was a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago. And the work you've done since then? Dad, I've read some of your code. I've seen what you built. It's elegant, it's brilliant, and they're just going to hand it over to someone who doesn't understand it? I smiled despite myself. Emily's passion had always burned hot, especially when she perceived injustice. They're going to try. Whether they succeed is another question. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Take some time to think. Figure out what I want. Well, whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. Her voice softened. Not because of your job or your code or any of that, because you're my dad, and you've always done the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. After we hung up, I sat in my home office for a long time, staring at the screensaver on my computer. It showed pictures from family vacations, cycling through images of Emily as a child, then a teenager, then a young woman. There was a photo of May and me on our 20th anniversary, standing in front of a restaurant in San Francisco where we'd had our first date. A picture of my mother, who had passed away 3 years ago, holding Emily at her christening. The photos cycled through our history, moments frozen in time, while the present kept moving forward, whether I was ready for it or not. The next few weeks existed in a strange limbo. I went to work every day, sat at my desk, attended meetings, responded to emails. But everything felt different now that I knew it was ending. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher. The conversations seemed more hollow. The code I reviewed, the systems I maintained, the problems I solved, they all felt like someone else's problems now. I had never been the type to coast. Even knowing my time was limited, I couldn't stop caring about the work. When I found a vulnerability in our authentication system that could have exposed customer data, I stayed late to patch it. When a junior engineer struggled with a complex integration problem, I spent hours walking her through the solution. When a critical server started showing signs of failure, I worked with the operations team to migrate the load before it crashed. It was who I was. I couldn't turn it off just because they had decided I was expendable. But I also started taking notes. Not about the work itself, I had always documented that meticulously, but about everything else. The decisions that were made above my pay grade, the projects that were funded, and the ones that weren't. The patterns I had observed over 16 years about how Nexus Technologies actually operated, as opposed to how it claimed to operate. I wasn't sure what I would do with these notes. They might amount to nothing, but something had shifted in my relationship with the company, and I found myself wanting to understand it clearly. 3 weeks after my termination meeting, I received an unexpected email. It was from Marcus Webb, a name I hadn't seen in almost 15 years. Marcus and I had worked together at my first tech job, back when we were both young and idealistic and believed we could change the world through software. He had moved to academia, becoming a professor of computer science at MIT, while I had stayed in industry. We had lost touch, as people do. Our friendship reduced to occasional LinkedIn likes and birthday messages. Ryan, the email read, I've been following your work from afar, particularly the threat detection system that Nexus has been marketing. I suspect there's a story there that the marketing materials don't tell. I'm going to be in the Bay Area next week for a conference. Would you have time for dinner? I think we should talk. I read the email 3 times trying to parse its meaning. Marcus was not the type for casual correspondence. If he was reaching out after 15 years, he had a reason. I replied that I would be happy to meet him, and we arranged dinner for the following Thursday at a quiet restaurant in Mountain View. Marcus had aged well, which annoyed me slightly. His hair had gone gray at the temples, but his face retained the same sharp intelligence I remembered from our younger days. He still dressed like a professor. Corduroy jacket, Oxford shirt, no tie, and still had the habit of gesturing expansively when he talked. Ryan, he shook my hand warmly. You look good. A little tired, maybe, but good. It's been a difficult few weeks. I heard. He studied my face as we sat down. Nexus is eliminating senior engineering positions. One of my former students works there. She told me about the restructuring. Small world. Smaller than people think. Marcus ordered a scotch, and I asked for a beer. When the waitress left, he leaned forward. So, tell me about the threat detection system. I hesitated. What do you want to know? I want to know if you built it. The directness surprised me. Why do you think I built it? Marcus smiled. Because I've read the technical papers Nexus published. I've studied the architecture, and I recognize your fingerprints all over it. The way you structure algorithms, the elegance of your error handling, the particular approach to redundancy you've been refining since we worked together in '09. It's distinctive, Ryan. Anyone who knows your work would recognize it. I took a long drink of my beer, buying time. It's complicated. I'm sure it is. That's why I wanted to talk. So I told him. Not everything. Not yet, but enough. How I had been fascinated by machine learning applications for security. How I had spent years tinkering with approaches in my home lab. How I had developed a prototype that showed promising results. How I had shared it with Nexus, naively believing that my contribution would be recognized and valued. And then it was absorbed, integrated into the company's product suite, marketed as a Nexus innovation. My name doesn't appear anywhere in the public documentation. Marcus nodded slowly. Did you sign anything? Any IP assignment specifically covering this work? No. The standard employment agreement covers work done during company time using company resources. But I built this on my own time, on my own equipment, before I ever showed it to Nexus. Did you document that? The development process? Obsessively. It was one of my habits, keeping detailed records of my work, not because I expected problems, but because good documentation was part of good engineering. Every commit, every test, every iteration, time-stamped and preserved on my personal systems. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Ryan, do you understand what you might have here? I understand it's complicated. It's more than complicated. If Nexus has been using your intellectual property without proper acquisition, building products on your innovations without compensation or credit, that's potentially actionable. Depending on the specifics, it could be worth millions. I felt something tighten in my chest. I'm not looking to sue them. Maybe not. But you should understand your options. Marcus paused, choosing his next words carefully. I have contacts in the academic world who study these cases, IP disputes in tech, the exploitation of senior engineers, the patterns of how companies absorb individual innovations. It's a significant area of research. Your situation might be illustrative. You want to write a paper about me? Not just a paper. I want to understand what happened and help you figure out what to do about it. Because here's the thing, Ryan. What happened to you isn't unique. It's happening to experienced engineers all over the industry. The ones who built the systems that make these companies valuable are being pushed out, their contributions erased, their knowledge discarded. And nobody's paying attention because, individually, each case seems like just another corporate restructuring. I thought about the other senior engineers at Nexus who had been terminated in the same round. Jim Patterson, who had designed the database architecture that handled millions of transactions per day. Sarah Kim, who had built the API framework that third-party developers relied on. Tom Reeves, who had created the monitoring systems that caught problems before they became disasters. All of them eliminated in the name of forward-looking technical strategy. What would understanding it accomplish? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Marcus smiled. But isn't that always the case with understanding? I went home that night with my head spinning. May was already asleep, but I couldn't follow her to bed. Instead, I went to my garage, to the workbench where I had built so many things over the years. The prototype hardware for the threat detection system was long gone, integrated into Nexus's infrastructure, but the documentation remained on my personal servers. I pulled up the earliest commits, dated nearly 8 years ago. The code was cruder than I remembered, the architecture less elegant, but the core ideas were there. The approaches to pattern recognition, the methods for reducing false positives, the strategies for real-time threat assessment. All of it developed before I ever mentioned the project to anyone at Nexus. I had been so proud when I showed it to them, so eager to contribute, to prove that I was more than just a cog in the machine. I remember the meeting where I presented the initial results to the security team, the expressions of surprise and excitement, the questions about how I had achieved such accuracy rates, the discussions about how to integrate my approach into the existing infrastructure. No one had mentioned intellectual property. No one had suggested I should consult a lawyer. The assumption, unspoken but pervasive, was that good work done by employees belonged to the company. That innovation was a collective enterprise, even when it came from individual effort. That loyalty meant giving freely and trusting that the giving would be reciprocated. I had believed that. For years, I had believed it. Now, sitting in my garage at midnight, scrolling through code I had written in stolen hours and early mornings and long weekends, I wondered what else I had been wrong about. The following week, I met Marcus again, this time at his hotel room where we could talk without being overheard. He had brought a colleague, Dr. Priya Sharma, a professor of law at Stanford who specialized in intellectual property disputes in the technology sector. I've reviewed the materials you sent, Priya said. She was in her early 50s, precise in her speech, with an intensity that reminded me of May when she was focused on a difficult diagnosis. The documentation is remarkably thorough. Based on what I've seen, you have a strong case for sole ownership of the core intellectual property underlying Nexus's threat detection products. What does that mean practically? It depends on what you want. If you wanted to pursue litigation, you could potentially recover significant damages. Nexus has built a substantial product line on what appears to be your innovation. Their marketing materials cite the threat detection system as a key competitive advantage. If a court determined that they were using your IP without authorization, she left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. I told Marcus I'm not looking to sue them. May I ask why not? I had been thinking about this question for days. Because it's not that simple. Yes, I built the core system, but Nexus engineers expanded it, refined it, integrated it with other technologies. A lot of people contributed to what it became. And beyond the technical questions, there are human factors. 180 people work on products that depend on this infrastructure. If I went after the IP aggressively, destabilized the company, those people would suffer. With respect, Priya said, those people will suffer regardless. You said yourself that Nexus is eliminating senior positions. The instability isn't something you would create. It's something that already exists. Maybe, but there's a difference between accepting that I can't prevent harm and actively causing it. Marcus spoke up. Ryan, I understand the ethical concerns. They're legitimate, but consider the other side. If companies can absorb individual innovations without compensation, if they can treat experienced engineers as disposable resources while profiting from their work, that has consequences too. For you, certainly, but also for everyone who comes after you. I'm not interested in being a martyr. I'm not suggesting martyrdom. I'm suggesting clarity. Marcus leaned forward. You have information that Nexus doesn't want you to have. You have documentation that proves something they would rather keep hidden. Whatever you decide to do with it, you should understand what it is and what it means. I was quiet for a long moment. What would you suggest? Learn, Priya said. Before you make any decisions, understand the full picture, not just your situation, but the broader context. How does Nexus treat intellectual property? How have they handled similar situations in the past? What are their vulnerabilities, their pressure points? You don't have to do anything with that knowledge, but you should have it. So I began to learn. Over the following weeks, while outwardly continuing my normal work routine, I quietly investigated the company I had devoted 16 years of my life to. What I found was not quite what I expected. The simple narrative would have been corporate malfeasance, a greedy company deliberately exploiting its workers, covering up theft of intellectual property, prioritizing profits over people. And there were elements of that, certainly. The IP practices at Nexus were sloppy, driven by the assumption that employment contracts covered everything important and the details would work themselves out. Senior engineers were chronically undercompensated compared to their contributions. The recent round of layoffs had targeted high-salary positions without adequate consideration of the knowledge being lost. But there was also genuine complexity. Miranda Okonkwo hadn't built a predatory company. She had built a company that grew faster than its processes could keep up with. The IP issues weren't the result of deliberate exploitation, but of policies that hadn't been updated as the company expanded. The layoffs weren't driven by contempt for experience, but by pressure from investors who measured success in quarterly metrics rather than long-term stability. The people responsible weren't villains. They were ordinary people making ordinary decisions under pressure, and the cumulative effect of those decisions was causing real harm. This didn't make the harm any less real. It didn't mean I had to accept it, but it changed how I thought about what to do next. May noticed the change in me before I could articulate it myself. "You're carrying something heavy," she said one night as we sat on the back porch watching the stars. It was late October. The air had turned cool, and I could smell wood smoke from somewhere in the neighborhood. "I can see it in the way you move. I'm trying to figure out the right thing to do. About the company, about all of it." I told her what I had learned, the full picture of my intellectual property and Nexus's practices and the broader patterns Marcus and Priya had helped me understand. She listened without interrupting, her face calm and attentive. "What are the options?" she asked when I finished. "I could do nothing. Take the severance, move on, find another job, or retire early. Let the company sort itself out without my involvement. And I could pursue litigation. Priya thinks there's a strong case for damages, potentially in the millions. It would be drawn out and ugly, but the legal theory is solid. Is that what you want?" No. I was surprised by how certain I was. The money would be nice, I suppose, but it wouldn't be worth the cost. Not just to me, but to everyone else caught in the crossfire. May nodded. "What else?" I could go to Marcus's contact at the tech press, make it public, let the market and public opinion render judgment instead of the courts. Would that accomplish anything? Maybe. It would certainly embarrass Nexus. It might pressure them to change some practices, but it would also paint a target on my back. Whistleblowers don't exactly have great career prospects. Is there another option? I hesitated. There might be. I've been thinking about it, but I'm not sure if it's possible. Tell me. So I told her my idea. It was complicated, risky, and required things to go right that might not go right. It would mean giving up the chance for personal vindication in exchange for something broader and less certain. It would require trusting people I wasn't sure I could trust. When I finished, May was quiet for a long moment. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, indifferent to human concerns. "That sounds like you," she finally said. "What do you mean?" "Trying to fix the system instead of fighting it, looking for solutions instead of blame. You've always been that way. Even when you're angry, even when you've been wronged, you'd rather build than destroy. Is that a criticism?" "No." She reached over and took my hand. "It's why I married you." I requested a meeting with Miranda Okonkwo on a gray November morning, 3 weeks before my scheduled departure from Nexus. I asked for an hour and suggested we meet in her office rather than a conference room. The request was unusual enough that she accepted, though I could sense her wariness when her assistant confirmed the time. Her office occupied a corner of the top floor, with windows looking out over the San Francisco Bay. It was tastefully decorated. A few pieces of African art, family photos on the credenza, bookshelves lined with a mix of technical texts and leadership books. Nothing ostentatious, but clearly the office of someone with power. "Ryan." She rose to shake my hand when I entered. "Please, sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine." She poured 2 glasses from a pitcher on her desk and settled into the chair across from me. The setup was deliberate, not behind her desk, where hierarchy would be emphasized, but in the sitting area, where we could talk as equals. Miranda was good at this kind of signaling. "I was surprised you wanted to meet," she said. "I thought our last conversation was fairly conclusive." "It was. I'm not here to renegotiate my departure." "Then what can I do for you?" I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I had rehearsed this conversation 100 times, but reality always differed from rehearsal. "I want to tell you a story," I said, "about how I came to work at Nexus and what I've learned since then. Will you listen?" Miranda's expression was guarded but curious. "All right." So I told her. I started with the beginning, how I had been recruited 16 years ago, when Nexus was still small, still hungry, still the kind of place where individual contributions mattered. I told her about the projects I had worked on, the problems I had solved, the late nights and early mornings and endless debugging sessions. I told her about the culture shifts I had witnessed as the company grew, the gradual depersonalization, the increasing distance between the people who made decisions and the people who did the work. Then I told her about the threat detection system, how I had developed it on my own time, with my own resources, driven by curiosity rather than corporate mandate, how I had shared it with Nexus because I believed in the company and wanted to contribute, how it had been absorbed without proper IP acquisition, built upon and marketed and monetized without acknowledgement of its origins. Miranda's expression shifted as I spoke, first skepticism, then surprise, then something more complicated. "I have documentation," I said. "Time-stamped commits, development logs, everything needed to prove that the core IP was created independently. If I wanted to pursue this legally, I could. Several attorneys have confirmed that. Why are you telling me this instead of serving papers? Because I don't want to pursue it legally. Not because I'm not angry. I am. Not because I don't think I have grounds. I do, but because litigation would hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt. People who had nothing to do with the IP situation. People who are just trying to do their jobs, the same way I was." Miranda studied me for a long moment. "What do you want, Ryan?" "I want to fix the problem. Not just for me, for everyone. The IP practices at this company are sloppy. The way senior engineers are treated is unsustainable. The knowledge loss from these layoffs is going to cost you more in the long run than you're saving now. I'm not saying this to threaten you. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I've watched it happen, and because I still care about this company even though it's discarding me." "That's admirable, but what specifically are you proposing?" I handed her a folder I had prepared. 3 things. First, an independent audit of IP practices, focusing on work that may have been developed outside company time and resources. Not just my work, everyone's. This isn't about assigning blame, it's about making things right. Miranda opened the folder and scanned the first few pages. "Second," I continued, a formal knowledge transfer program for senior engineers. Not the rushed 3-month handoff I was given, but a structured process that captures institutional knowledge and ensures continuity. Call it an emeritus engineer program if you want. Make it a competitive advantage, something that shows your clients you take long-term stability seriously. And third, I want credit. Not money, not equity, not a golden parachute. I want my name on the patents for work I created. I want acknowledgement in the technical documentation. I want future engineers who build on my foundations to know whose shoulders they're standing on. Miranda set down the folder and looked at me directly. This is not what I expected. I know. If you have the leverage you claim, you could be asking for much more. I could be. But what would that accomplish? I'd have money, sure, and Nexus would have a crisis, and a lot of people would lose their jobs, and the industry would have one more story about how companies and employees can't trust each other. I've watched that story play out too many times. I'm tired of it. Why should I believe you? Why should I believe this isn't a negotiating tactic, a way to establish good faith before you lower the boom? I considered the question seriously. You shouldn't, necessarily. Trust has to be earned, and I'm asking you to take a risk based on limited information, but consider the alternative. If I wanted to harm Nexus, I could do it without this meeting. The fact that I'm here, talking to you, proposing solutions instead of making demands, that should tell you something about my intentions. Miranda was quiet for a long time. I could see her processing, calculating, weighing risks and possibilities. She hadn't become CEO by making rash decisions. The board would need to approve any changes to IP practices, she finally said, and the emeritus program would require significant investment. I can't promise anything. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for consideration. Read the proposal. Think about it. Talk to your lawyers if you need to, but talk to them about how to make this work, not about how to make it go away. She nodded slowly. I'll review it. But Ryan, even if we move forward with some of this, it doesn't change the restructuring decisions. Your position is still being eliminated. I know. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Really? I thought about my father, who had worked for the same company for 40 years and received a pension that vanished when the company declared bankruptcy, about my mother, who had devoted her career to a firm that replaced her with technology without ceremony or acknowledgement, about all the people I had watched over the years give their best to organizations that took without giving back. It's about what we owe each other, I said. It's about the idea that work is a relationship, not just a transaction. It's about believing that, even in an imperfect system, it's possible to do better. Miranda was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, more personal. You know, my father built a small electronics repair shop in Lagos. When I was young, I used to watch him with his customers. He would spend hours fixing things that weren't worth fixing, economically speaking. Old radios, broken appliances, things people should have just replaced. I asked him once why he bothered, and he said, "These things carry people's memories. They're not just machines. They're part of people's lives. We owe them respect." She looked out the window at the gray November sky. I've thought about that a lot, running this company, trying to balance the numbers with the humanity. Sometimes I think I've lost sight of what he meant. Maybe, I said, or maybe you're being reminded. The weeks that followed were complicated. Miranda brought my proposal to the board, who reacted with the predictable mix of defensiveness and concern. The IP audit raised questions that made lawyers nervous. The emeritus program required budget that had already been allocated elsewhere. The credit provisions touched on issues of ownership that companies prefer to leave ambiguous, but something had shifted. I wasn't sure exactly when or how, but the conversations changed. Instead of fighting over positions, people started exploring possibilities. The board's general counsel, who I had expected to be the strongest opponent, became an unexpected ally after I walked her through the documentation. She recognized that the current practices created liability far beyond my individual case. "We should have cleaned this up years ago," she admitted in one meeting. "Better to do it now, on our own terms, than wait for someone less reasonable to force the issue." The emeritus program proved easier to implement than expected. Several other senior engineers, some scheduled for layoffs and some not, expressed interest in participating. The knowledge transfer protocols we developed became a template that other companies later adapted, and the credit, that turned out to be the simplest part of all. A few database entries, a few patent modifications, a few acknowledgments in technical documentation, things that should have happened automatically if anyone had thought to ask. My last official day at Nexus Technologies was a Friday in late December. I packed up my desk, said goodbye to colleagues, accepted the obligatory cake and well wishes, the usual rituals of corporate departure. But there was a small ceremony that wasn't standard. Miranda came down to the engineering floor herself, which was unusual, and gathered the team in the common area. "Ryan Chen is leaving us today," she said. "But before he goes, I want to acknowledge something that should have been acknowledged long ago. The threat detection system that has become one of our key competitive advantages, the system that has protected our clients from countless security threats, was designed and built by Ryan on his own time as a labor of love. He shared it with this company because he believed in what we were building. We should have recognized that contribution properly from the beginning. We're doing so now." She handed me a framed copy of the patent certificate, with my name prominently displayed as the inventor. "Thank you, Ryan, for everything you've built and everything you've taught us." The applause from my colleagues was warm and genuine. Some of them knew the full story. Others only knew that something had changed. But they all understood on some level that this moment mattered. After the ceremony, Marcus Webb approached me. He had flown in from Boston specifically for this occasion. "That was unexpected," he said. "It surprised me too. How do you feel?" I looked around the office where I had spent 16 years, the fluorescent lights, the cluttered desks, the walls covered with whiteboards full of ideas. I had been so angry when this journey started, so certain that I had been wronged, so eager to find justice. "Complicated," I admitted. "This isn't the ending I imagined. Real stories rarely have clean endings." "No, but I think this is a better one than I might have gotten. Not perfect. Nothing's perfect, but better." Marcus nodded. "What happens now?" "Now, I figure out what comes next. I have some ideas. There's a professor at Stanford who studies IP practices in tech who wants to collaborate on some research, a nonprofit that supports displaced tech workers who could use some advisory help, maybe even some consulting, if the right opportunities come along. And the anger, the sense of injustice? I thought about it honestly. It's still there. I don't think it ever completely goes away when you've been treated unfairly, but it's not the only thing there. And I think I found a way to use it that didn't just burn everything down. A year later, I sat in my garage, looking at the workbench where so much of my career had really happened. The threat detection system was still running at Nexus, now properly attributed. The Emeritus program had expanded to other companies in the industry. The IP audit had revealed several other cases of unacknowledged contributions, all of which were being addressed. I was consulting now, helping companies develop better practices for valuing senior engineers. It wasn't the career I had imagined when I was young and idealistic and believed I could change the world through software, but it was meaningful work, and it made a difference, and I was good at it. The phone rang. Emily, calling from Seattle. "Dad, I have news." Her voice was excited. "I got offered a position at a new company, senior engineer, leading the security architecture team." "That's wonderful, Em. Congratulations. They specifically mentioned your work as an influence. The hiring manager said they were trying to build a culture where experience was valued and contributions were recognized. They asked if I could put them in touch with you for some consulting." I smiled. "I'd be happy to talk to them." "Dad," Emily paused. "I know the last year was hard, leaving Nexus, all the uncertainty, the difficult decisions, but I wanted you to know what you did mattered, not just for yourself. You showed that there's a way to stand up for what's right without destroying everything in the process. That's important. Thank you, Em. That means more than you know." After we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of my garage. The workbench was cluttered with new projects, small things, experiments, curiosities I was exploring now that I had time. Not because anyone was paying me to, but because I loved solving problems. That was the thing about experience I had come to understand. It wasn't just knowledge or skill, though it included both. It was perspective, the ability to see patterns, to understand context, to know which battles were worth fighting and which weren't. Miranda Okonkwo had asked me once, during one of our later conversations, why I hadn't pursued the harder path, why I hadn't taken Nexus to court, demanded justice, used my leverage to maximum effect. "Because that's not the world I want to live in," I had told her. "The world where the only way to get recognition is through force. The world where every relationship is adversarial, every negotiation is zero-sum, every grievance ends in litigation. I've seen that world. It's exhausting, and it doesn't make anyone happier. So, you chose cooperation over confrontation? I chose the approach most likely to lead somewhere good. Not perfect, good. There's a difference between idealism and pragmatism, but it's not as large as people think." May found me in the garage that evening, still sitting at my workbench, thinking deep thoughts, remembering. She pulled up a chair beside me. We sat together in comfortable silence, the way only long married couples can. Any regrets? She finally asked. Some. I wish I had understood my rights earlier. I wish I had documented things more carefully from the beginning. I wish I hadn't trusted the system to take care of me. But I don't regret trying to fix things instead of burning them down. I don't regret looking for solutions instead of revenge. The outcome wasn't perfect, but it was acceptable. And maybe, in its small way, it planted some seeds that will grow into something better. May nodded. That's the thing about seeds. You never know which ones will take root. No, you just plant them and hope. I still work in tech, though not the way I used to. I advise companies on how to value experience. I mentor young engineers, helping them understand their rights and their worth. I write about the structural problems in the industry and the small practical things people can do to address them. It's not the career I planned, but I've learned that plans are just stories we tell ourselves about a future we can't control. The real measure of a life isn't whether it followed the script. It's whether, when the script had to be abandoned, we found something worth doing instead. The gray hair that that was a different story. The gray hair that Miranda once associated with obsolescence turned out to mean something else entirely. Not just experience, not just wisdom, but persistence, the willingness to keep going, to keep caring, to keep trying to make things better, even when the easier path would be to walk away. My father told me once that the measure of a man wasn't what he did when things were easy. It was what he did when things were hard, when the system was against him, when the people in power didn't want to hear what he had to say. I used to think that meant fighting, standing your ground, never backing down, proving through sheer force of will that you were right and they were wrong. Now I know it's more complicated than that. Sometimes fighting is necessary, sometimes walking away is the right choice, and sometimes, the times that matter most, the answer is neither fighting nor fleeing, but finding a third path, one that acknowledges the damage done without perpetuating it, one that seeks justice without requiring destruction, one that builds something new on the foundations of something broken. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, understated and elegant. The Nexus Technologies Board of Directors cordially invites you to a celebration honoring the company's 20th anniversary and the establishment of the Ryan Chen Innovation Fellowship. I stood in my kitchen, reading it twice, to make sure I understood correctly. May came up behind me, reading over my shoulder. Will you go? I don't know. It feels strange. Good strange or bad strange. I thought about it. The 5 years since leaving Nexus had been eventful. The consulting practice had grown. The advocacy work had expanded. I had helped dozens of senior engineers navigate difficult departures and negotiate fair recognition for their contributions. Small victories mostly, but they added up. Nexus itself had changed. Miranda was still CEO, but the culture had shifted. The Emeritus program had become a model for the industry. The IP practices had been reformed. And now, apparently, they were naming a fellowship after me, a program to support experienced engineers pursuing innovative personal projects. I think I need to go, I said finally. Not for recognition, but for closure maybe, or acknowledgement, or just to see how the story ends. Does it end? No, that's the point. It doesn't end. It keeps going, keeps evolving. But there are moments along the way where you can stop and see how far you've come. The anniversary celebration was held in the Nexus headquarters atrium, the same building where I had worked for 16 years. Walking through the entrance felt surreal, familiar and foreign at the same time. The fluorescent lights had been replaced with warmer LEDs. The cubicle farms had been redesigned into more humane workspaces, but the core architecture was the same, and with it, the memories. Miranda found me by the refreshment table, looking uncomfortable in a suit I rarely wore. Ryan, I'm so glad you came. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for accepting. She paused, then smiled. I still remember that meeting in my office, when you laid out everything, the documentation, the proposals, the possibility of going to war. I was terrified. You didn't seem terrified. I'm good at hiding it, but I remember thinking, this man could destroy us. He has the ammunition, he has the grievance, and he's smart enough to know exactly where to aim. And instead, he's offering to help us do better. It wasn't altruism, I said honestly. It was calculation. I figured out that destruction wouldn't get me what I actually wanted. It would have satisfied my anger for a while, but anger is a poor foundation for building anything. Calculation that benefited everyone. Miranda shook her head. I've told this story so many times in the last 5 years. to boards, to executives, to investors, about how we almost lost something essential and how it took an engineer who had every reason to hate us to show us a better path. That's a generous interpretation. It's the true one. She glanced toward the stage, where preparations were underway. We should begin soon. But before we do, there's someone who wanted to meet you. She led me to a corner of the atrium where a young woman stood, looking nervous. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the intense focus I recognized from countless engineers I had worked with over the years. "Ryan, this is Aisha Okonkwo, my daughter." I shook the young woman's hand. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Chen." "Ryan, I wanted to thank you." Aisha's voice was earnest, the words obviously rehearsed. "I've been reading about your work, the advocacy for senior engineers, the research on IP practices. It's changed how I think about my own career. I'm just starting out, and there's so much pressure to move fast, to not ask questions, to just trust that everything will work out. Your writing helped me see that there's another way." I was quiet for a moment, unexpectedly moved. "What way is that?" "Being strategic about protection while still being collaborative, understanding my rights while still being a good colleague, planning for the long term while still caring about the present." She smiled. "My mother says you taught her something important. I think you taught me something too." The ceremony itself was brief. Miranda spoke about the company's history, its challenges, its evolution. She mentioned my name in context, the innovations I had contributed, the crisis we had navigated, the better practices that had emerged. Then she introduced the Chen Innovation Fellowship, a funded program for experienced engineers to pursue independent research, with proper IP protections and credit structures built in from the start. When she invited me to the stage, I had not prepared remarks. I had assumed I would just accept whatever plaque or certificate they had prepared and say a few polite words. Instead, standing before a crowd of engineers, young and old, some I recognized and many I didn't, I found myself saying something different. 15 years ago, I was angry. I had given this company my best work for 16 years, and I felt like it had been taken without recognition or appreciation. I had the documentation to prove it, and I had lawyers ready to pursue it. I could have made a lot of money, and I could have hurt a lot of people, and I could have been right the entire time. The room was silent, but being right isn't always enough. Sometimes you have to ask, what are you trying to build? What do you want to exist after all the fighting is done? I realized that I wanted to work in an industry where experience was valued, where contributions were recognized, where the relationship between companies and employees was more than just a transaction. And I realized that I wasn't going to build that industry through destruction, only through creation. I paused, gathering my thoughts. This fellowship isn't about me. It's about a principle. That innovation comes from individuals, and individuals deserve to be recognized and protected. That experience is an asset, not a liability. That the gray hair some people see as obsolescence is actually evidence of persistence, the willingness to keep doing the work, keep solving the problems, keep caring about the craft, even when no one is watching. I looked out at the audience, at young engineers starting their careers, at senior engineers wondering about their futures, at managers and executives trying to build sustainable companies. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this: your work has value, and you have the right to protect it. But value isn't just measured in dollars or patents or recognition. It's measured in what you build, what you contribute, what you leave behind for those who come after. Choose battles worth fighting. Choose victories worth winning. And when you have leverage, use it to make things better, not just for yourself, but for everyone. After the ceremony, I stood on the observation deck of the Nexus building, looking out over the San Francisco Bay. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and purple, and the city lights were beginning to flicker on across the shoreline. May found me there, having slipped away from the reception. She stood beside me without speaking, and we watched the sunset together. "How do you feel?" she asked eventually. I thought about the question, about these 16 years at Nexus, the bitter departure, the difficult negotiations, the work that had followed, about the fellowship that now bore my name, the engineers it would support, the future it might help create. "Grateful," I said finally, "tired, hopeful, all at once." That sounds about right. I keep thinking about what my father used to say, that the measure of a man is what he does when things are hard. I think I finally understand what he meant. What did he mean? It's not about winning or losing. It's about choosing who you want to be, even when it would be easier to choose something else. I could have been the person who burned Nexus to the ground. I would have been justified, but that's not who I wanted to be. And who is that? I looked at my wife of 30 years, at the gray in her hair that matched the gray in mine, at the face that had seen me through every triumph and failure of my adult life. Someone who builds things, I said. Someone who fixes what's broken instead of breaking more. Someone who believes that even in a flawed system, with imperfect people, it's possible to make things a little bit better. May squeezed my hand. I think you succeeded. Maybe. I think the jury's still out. These things take a long time to know for sure. Then we'll wait and see. She smiled. We're good at that by now. The fellowship continues, funding senior engineers to pursue innovative projects with proper protections and recognition. The industry has changed, slowly and imperfectly, toward valuing experience alongside energy. And somewhere in Silicon Valley, in garages and home offices and late-night coding sessions, engineers are building the next generation of innovations, knowing that their work has value and that there are people who will fight to help them protect it. That's the ending, as much as these things have endings. Not a victory, exactly, not a defeat, just another chapter in a story that keeps being written by countless people making countless choices about who they want to be. I'm still making those choices, still consulting, still advocating, still tinkering with code in my garage because I love solving problems, still figuring out, day by day, how to balance anger and forgiveness, justice and mercy, fighting and building. The fluorescent lights in my garage buzz their familiar song. The computer hums with possibilities, and outside the window, the world keeps spinning, full of problems worth solving and battles worth choosing and futures worth building. That's enough. That's more than enough.